All right, Richard, thank you for joining us.
Well,
He's going to be kicking off our Black history, and we're going to be talking about Black history today. So I'm really ready, Richard, because you have some interesting things, and you have a fantastic resume here. So first, just give the audience and the people out there looking at us a little bit about you. Just go on and tell us from your own words a little bit about you.
Well, first of all, you started out with a very nice introduction. I don't know if my mom would say as nice of things. And you know what? I don't feel like a guest speaker. I may be just speaking here for the first time, but I don't feel like a guest at this church. I feel like I'm part of this church. And so I'm just like everybody else here. And I'm real happy to be here. But kind of what brought us together today and led to me being up here is my writing. And so he mentioned one of the things I like to do is write about travels. And so it all started about 4 years ago. I went on a big 2-month trip, and I went to South America, went to Antarctica. It was so much fun. It was so interesting. I wanted to share it with my friends, so I started writing these emails and sending it to them. And so not only do I address, like, where's the best restaurant, maybe the best tour to go on, but I'll say I want to address the issues. So whether it be homelessness in Buenos Aires or a Mother Teresa orphanage in Delhi, India, or talking about the U.S. healthcare system compared to those in the Baltic countries, I like to address that sort of thing.
And that's where I saw your writings, Richard. They were about the African American, and saw some of those writings that you went to Charleston. As a matter of fact, we're going to be sharing his writings over the next 3 weeks. They're going to be in our life notes. So if you have not signed up for them, we're going to share those with you. He said he's an amateur writer, so this is fantastic that we're going to share those. And we're going to share some of what we talked about today. One of the things you mentioned, Richard, I've seen in your writings is that you talked about Charleston. You visit Charleston, South Carolina, and you saw all of this history of the African American and what happened in slavery and during those times. Tell us a little bit about that, as through your lens.
Okay, well, certainly. And so, yes, Kathy and I recently went to Charleston, and that's, and I'm originally a Yankee from the North, and so I really got confronted, or I got to see some things about slavery there, and then, of course, the underlying condition of racism. So it made me think, but, before that, I want to say what I'm not here to do today.
Okay, tell us what you're
not. I'm not here to culturally appropriate. I'm not here to become black. I'm not here to tell black people what they should believe about Black History Month or how you should feel about Black History Month. And guess what? I'm not even here to present the white perspective. I'll say my perspective, though, is absent a black perspective. And it made me think of something. Remember that old book, To Kill a Mockingbird? And Atticus Finch said something, and I need to read it so I get it right. You never really understand a person until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it. And I can't do that, so I do the best I can. But hey, what I am here to do is to fulfill this church's mission this month, and that's to celebrate and honor Black History Month.
That's right. So when you went to Charleston, tell me about that, and you encountered all of this history about slave trade and all of that, and so you were now engulfed in some of the things that African Americans had to deal with and look at on a daily basis. Tell me what you...
Sure. So when I got to Charleston, I realized that Charleston had 3 roles in the slave trade. One, as a port where slaves were brought into this country. And then secondly, where slaves were traded. And then thirdly, where slaves were used. So Charleston's role in the slave trade, first as a place of importation. So for 200 years, it was the primary place where transatlantic slaves came from Africa to North America. Fully 40% of the slaves that came to North America came through Charleston.
So Charleston was this big hub of slavery during this time.
Absolutely. 150 to 200,000 slaves entered in over 1,000 shipments into Charleston.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's a staggering number. Now, and I say importation, I don't want to use an insensitive word. I'll get to it. I use that insensitive word to really drive home the impact because people didn't migrate, they were imported. It was involuntary, and so that's why I use that word. It's not migration.
Right.
It's importation. So now the importation of slaves stopped in 1808, long before the Civil War. Congress passed a law saying you couldn't do it. But trading of slaves continued. So in this quaint small building in the middle of Charleston, downtown Charleston, is this building called the Old Slave Mart Museum. And for about 10 years, until the end of the Civil War, domestic slaves were traded there among slave owners. So they were kept out back in the jail, brought in shackles up onto a slave, and auctioned off to new owners there. But while I was there,
So when you were there, you experienced this. What did you feel when you kind of came into the scene of this?
well, that was very interesting because at the Old Slave Mart Museum, I saw a word that really brought home the slavery condition to me. And the word was dehumanizing.
That was there?
Yeah, I saw that word at the Old Slave Mart Museum. It said dehumanizing. And because really, when we treat people as property, it strikes to the heart of our human condition. I mean, it's our self-determination, it's our liberty. And so maybe I can be treated, and we could all be treated poorly, but what distinguishes slavery is its property. It's truly dehumanizing. And so I think that's the distinctive word that really struck me while I was there.
What were some of the things that you or they may have explained that were dehumanizing?
Well, it's just the fact that a person could be traded. A person could be sold. A person could be taken from their homeland involuntarily and brought here. And then brought here and put to work for nothing. And then, when I decided I could sell that slave could be sold. And so that's inhumane. That's dehumanizing. And so, that's what I saw. Now, obviously, we went to another place while we were there because slaves were used in the Charleston area. And of course, they were used as domestic servants, but one of the places that they were used very principally was in plantations. So Kathy and I visited Plantation, and while we were there was an optional tour we could take to see slave cabins. And so we saw these slave cabins that were built in 1850, and they were used actually all the way up into 1990. Some caregivers lived in those cabins. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't get a real gist of what those cabins were like because they've been remodeled so many times. Now, they were still fairly rustic, mind you, but they weren't in their original condition. But there was a tour guide who described, look, this life was difficult as a slave. It was arduous. It was a lot of work, and obviously sometimes very cruel. But I go back and say, you might be able to say, if you went to rural South Carolina, white farmers at those times were very poor and didn't probably live in much better buildings. But again, it comes down to what was their basic condition. They were still humans. They weren't dehumanized. And so you could be treated poorly, you could live in bad conditions, but that's not slavery. Slavery is when we dehumanized people and treated them as property.
That's interesting. There's an author, I can't think of his name right now, but one of the things that he read as I read his book, I think it's Slavery and Social Disposition, but I'm not sure on that. But in the article, or in the book, he says one of the things that you have to do as part of slavery was they had to strip them of their culture. So that was part of the thing, and you had to strip them of their identity. So he had to strip them of two things, and there were some other things, but I just remember he said in the book that you have to strip them first of their culture and remove that. And I guess it would lean to this dehumanization because you had to get rid of all of the things they once knew, so to speak.
Yeah, that even brings it to another level. And so that's so true. Now, maybe some of you raised your eyebrows that Kathy and I went to visit a plantation because of the evil and disgusting things that happened there because of slavery. But I kind of ask you, did you raise your eyebrows when I said I went to the Slave Mart Museum where slaves are traded? Maybe not. If I told you next year we're going to Germany and we're going to visit a Nazi concentration camp, would you raise your eyebrows? Well, now I realize the analysis isn't that simple, because if you go to a concentration camp or when I went to the Slave Mart, the only purpose there was to educate myself and to honor the victims. And so I know it's more complicated when it comes to plantations. Kind of that. So I thought more about that. And so here's the complication that occurs in this tension. Because you criticize one for going to visit a plantation, and so then the plantation visitors, what they want to do is then disassociate the visit from slavery. I'm not going there because of slavery. And so it becomes this vicious cycle of support and disassociation and criticism. So the dialogue kind of goes like this. I'm going to the plantation to see this historic home. Well, you can't do that because there was racism and slavery there. Well, I say, no, I'm going to see that beautiful garden. And you say, no, you're going there because you're a racist. And then I say, no, I'm going because I want to see the story of the agricultural production of rice that was there for 100 years.
This is a big cycle.
It is. And before you know it, the cock has crowed, and I've denied slavery 3 times. So I got to think some more, and I said, you know what, maybe the problem isn't that the visit, it's what I call the omission of purpose. It's like I disassociate slavery from it. Instead of, I think we should embrace slavery. Not because slavery was good, but because slavery was part of the plantation. The plantation is a beautiful house, it's agriculture, it's a beautiful garden, and the plantation is slavery. And we ought to recognize that, we ought to educate about it, and we ought to use the plantations that way. And so it's that omission of purpose, I think, is the problem. I'll talk about the omission of purpose at Magnolia, and I don't think they do enough to honor slavery at Magnolia.
Why is that? Why don't you think they do enough to honor slavery?
Well, I think the first thing is I think slavery is such an important part of the tour and of the presence at a plantation home is that you can't charge me $8 separate for it. It ought to be right in at the base price. Now, in their defense, they charge $8 to go see the house, and they charge $8 to go see the swamp also.
The swamp?
Yeah, there's a swamp there with alligators and turtles. And
I don't know if I want to pay to see a swamp. But
it was pretty. It was pretty. So the other thing is, instead of the tour guide, the slave cabin tour guide could have been a descendant of slaves. Certainly, they could have found someone in Charleston that's a descendant of slaves and gave that tour. Now, guess what? It might have made me a little bit more uncomfortable to hear from the mouth of a descendant of a slave, but maybe that discomfort is exactly what I need. So it's not really any problem. And now I do understand, and this is true, that other plantation homes, they're doing more to make the slavery story more pronounced. And so that's occurring. But what I want to get into is how we use plantation homes to further the cause. And you'd say, well, no, we're trying to get rid of plantation homes. Well, I'll say let's look at it from a different perspective. Number one is we know that let's say 1 million people go see plantation homes every year. So this is an opportunity to tell the slave story. Don't we want to reach people where they're at? And if we really believe that those plantation tour visitors are racist, don't we want to reach the people who need us most? After all, Rockbridge, are we trying to recruit saints to come to this church? Or are we trying to recruit sinners like us to come here? Well, that strikes a little too close to home. So let me move on. But another way to look at it too is, hey, how do we use the scene of the crime to make a more impactful message? After all, we have Nazi concentration camps that are still there, and because they feel that if we bring you to the scene of the crime, it's a more impactful message for that reason. And then finally, it's just a matter of opportunity. If we accomplish the goal of eradicating plantations, guess what? We've eradicated the opportunity to tell the story to the 1 million visitors that go there each year. So why don't we want to remove that opportunity? Why don't we take advantage of the opportunity? So why don't, at these plantation homes, why don't we more prominently tell the story of slavery to educate and honor the victims and really use it as a tool for progress? And so I want to turn the argument on its head. Not that we get rid of them, that we use them. I think more can be accomplished with them than without them.
Did it show any statues or plaques or honoring people who may have even owned slaves? Did it do any of that?
No, there's certainly no honoring at the plantation, but that kind of, leads into another whole aspect of it, is because now we've dealt with plantation, we got to deal with maybe Confederate flags, and we got to deal with statues. And so if we're not talking about slavery, we're going to talk about that underlying condition. It's what existed before, during, and after slavery. It's racism. And so, we've got Confederate flags. Now, what I will say that when Kathy and I, from our perspective, when we went around Charleston, we didn't see any overt racism, we don't think. Certainly didn't see any Confederate flags. Now, what we did notice is that there weren't that many black residents in the city. If you compare it to New Orleans or Atlanta, where there's a large black presence, there wasn't that in Charleston. and I'll talk about that in a second. But you asked about statues, and certainly, I think by and large the battle over the Confederate flag has been won, and so that's gone. But now there's a battle over the statues, and I kind of think about them perhaps in the same way I think about the plantations. For the same reasons we might want to keep around the plantations, let's keep around those statues. But as Charleston did, they took a statue of James Calhoun from its 130-foot high perch in a city park and relegated it to another area. Now, who's James Calhoun? Prominent South Carolina businessman, politician, and was the vice president of the United States, and a staunch advocate of slavery. So maybe we should take his statue, put it in the corner, and say, hey, he was all those things: a businessman, he was a politician, he was a vice president, and he was an advocate of slavery. Let's educate people about why that was wrong and put it in its proper place.
Definitely need education. We want to educate people, and I think the plantations are doing something very similar to what we see with the Nazi concentration camp. Hey, it brings us to the scene. It lets us know the gravity of what had taken place. So you said also that the racism, it still exists. We know that. We still have racism existing today. And it affects us. It affects the African-American culture. And what would you say is how we should deal with some racism and things of that nature?
Well, gee, I think, certainly, and I'm not an academic, I'm not a scholar, I'm just this visitor that went there and saw things. And I think, it's dialogue. And then how do we use tragic events to advance the cause? And so we're all very familiar with the more recent tragic event at the Emmanuel African-American, I'm going to say it wrong, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, that in 2015, a white supremacist walked in, joined a Bible study, pulled out a gun, and murdered 9 black members of that church. And this awful thing, though, he wanted to start a race war, and he did the exact opposite. So there was an incredible outpouring of sympathy, incredible increase in the amount of racial dialogue that occurred there. In response to that, the police chief set up this illumination committee, I think it was Illumination Project, and they're trying to work towards a better future. Guess what happened? 1 month later, Nikki Haley, the governor, signed a law that entirely removed the Confederate flag from the state capitol. A few years later, the city council comes and formally apologizes for slavery at that time. So, there's progress made through these things. We talked about the statue removal. And so I think it's anything that creates greater dialogue between the races and instead of hiding these issues, bring these issues up. And I think, it's important. If I'm going to get into symbolism for a second, though, some of this symbolic stuff. And so there's a lot of symbolism that's occurred. So what would you say to someone if they said, look, you know what, I went to my front yard and I took the Confederate flag down from my flagpole and I had a Robert E. Lee statue in the front yard and I moved it to the corner of the backyard, and then I ran in and I told my wife, that room we sleep in at night, we're going to change the name of that room. And I went to the refrigerator, pulled out the bottle of syrup, and I covered up the label, and I went to the pantry, I took out a box of rice and I covered up that label. And then finally I went to the TV and I got the remote, and there's a famous movie from 1939 that's critically acclaimed and it has wind in the title, and I made it gone from my TV. Now, does that make me any less racist? Well, maybe it does, but the real question is, you'd ask me, is, what's in your heart? Well, you did all these things, so what's in your heart? And there's a big controversy going on today, Pastor. And you just see it in tweets and on TV all the time, and people arguing about it all the time. And what they're arguing about is words and definitions. Well, how do you categorize it? How do you classify it? How do you define what lives matter? We spend a lot of time doing that, and we spend no time talking about why lives matter. It's crazy. So look, 10 of us gathered around the table, and one said, hey, I hate to tell everybody, but I've got cancer. What do the other 9 do immediately? Well, we're going to pray for you, and then we're going to take turns taking you to the doctor, and we're going to take turns bringing food to the house. Now, none of the 9 say, wait, my life matters. Wait, my life matters. Why don't they say it? Well, of course, it's true, their life matters. But at this particular time, that one of our number is suffering. And at this particular time, we need to give extra special attention, love, and care to that person. So when there's a movement that says a particular name of a class of life matters, they're not saying no one else's life matters. It's just saying, hey, at this particular moment, this life needs more attention, love, and consideration. So that's what gets me so frustrated. You notice I didn't use any words and any classifications. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, how does that then everybody agrees with the message. But once I start inserting words in there, then everybody gets their back up and gets their hackles up and wants to complain and argue.
That's a good analogy. You're saying at this time, I'm hurting. At this time, I have pain. And at this time, I need your consolation. And so I think what you're saying is that we need to transcend culture and just worry about just being there for each other.
Right, absolutely. And look, the suffering is, related to racism. There's no doubt about it, and there's that element about it. And I'm not trying to ignore or disassociate the element. What I'm trying to say here is that, yes, we do need to look at, the root cause and not take everything so personally. So when your life matters, that means mine doesn't? No, I don't think you're saying that. And I don't think that's what anyone's saying. It just means this time, this moment in time, this is what we need. This is what we need.
So I see that you are right that Charleston has an interest in doing the right thing, right?
Yeah, so we talked about all the things that has been done, and I think there's still things that are being done. So look, the statue of James Calhoun just came down last year, and then same thing last year, I want to read it again, that the city created a special commission on equity, inclusion, racial conciliation to achieve racial equity. Guess what? There's enormous community support. There's an international African-American museum being built that's going to be opened up next year. Oh. But hey, look, at the same time, I naturally tend to the goodness, and I want to be optimistic, and I want to say everything's great, and I got rose-colored lenses in these glasses. Look, there's no doubt more needs to be done, and as I was doing my research, I found people saying, hey, still more needs to be done. I agree. And then the other thing is, and I also include, that'll be in the Life Notes, I think, a link to an article that's decidedly negative. I present the option. Other viewpoint is that there are writers out there who say, hey, it's worse than ever. And so we ought to hear that also, that it's worse than ever, and not just my hopefully rosy view of it. But I'll just, here's my thing about the whole racism and the progress made and how we measure it. Look, I can go and quote statistics and tell you that racism is less than ever. There are statistics that say that. And that's great, and it may be true, they may not be true, but even if they're true, what difference does it make? We still have some, and we still need to work on it. I mean, if I told you that cancer survival rates are higher than ever, cancer mortality rates are lower than ever, do you say, wait, let's stop searching for a cure for cancer? No. The search for a cure for cancer remains unabated. So why don't we do the same thing with racism, no matter how good it is today? I'm not suggesting it is, but even if it is, no matter how good, why would we stop looking for the cure? So that's why I say, we just must keep on doing it.
Wow, that's good. This is real good stuff. I'm glad we got this chance to talk. But also, you came here to the church, and we're a predominantly African-American body. And you came in, Richard. And so, just tell us about that story, because I know this wasn't the only church you visited.
Well, yeah, I've got to get this off my chest, Pastor. Well, look, so some of you have heard the story, and it's really one for a different day. But in 2019, I went to 33 different churches, searching for churches. And I came here. And look, I knew when I walked in here I was different. I knew that you knew I was different. But one thing is I wasn't treated any different. Oh, and I thought, wait, the difference was going to lead to a difference in the way. You were going to change the way you treated me. I just knew it was going to happen, and I waited, and it didn't happen the 5th time. And you see, I was thinking the change was going to happen, and I was thinking, wait, the change is going to be negative. You're going to treat me worse because I'm different. And that's what I was expecting. It didn't happen the 5th time. It didn't happen the 10th time. Now it's over a year, and it still hasn't happened. So then, boy, I had to really think about why that was occurring. Why was it happening? And you know why I came to this conclusion? That Rockbridge Church treats me on a very basic level, very low basic level. And then I said, oh, wow, they treat me on the most important level. They just treat me as a child of God. Whoa. Then I came to the realization that the person who needed change, the person I had to recognize the difference, and that the real difference was that I needed to change the way I thought. And so what I like to say is that God's love through you changed me. And that's why I'm here today.
Wow, that's powerful, Richard. And that's what we're about. We always say, if we love God, then we can love others. And so it's important that we have the love of God, that we can share that to you. So you saw that the love we have for God that is being poured out to you, and that's a great thing. And we want to applaud the people here at the church and what you do, because it's magnificent work. So again, Richard, hey, we want to thank you for taking the time out and coming to just share your story, share kind of who you are, share a little bit about your experiences. And we got to see that. We're kicking off our Black History Month, and I thank you for being our guest and letting us know about it and letting us hear about it from you. And so it has been fantastic. Guys, give Richard a hand of praise, thank him for being with us. Thank him. And continue, guys. We just want to thank you for joining us today. We just want to give you an opportunity to let you know that we have all of these culture empowerment summits that are coming at the end of the month. So look for them. Check out our website, our Facebook, and guess what, guys? We'll see you next week. Thank you for being with us. May God bless you and may God keep you. Amen. Give the Lord a hand clap. Thank you, Rick.